A former Navy SEAL thought he was just checking an empty road no one cared about anymore. But his dog stopped at the last cabin and refused to leave. Inside, a voice answered,
"He's not here.
not afraid,
I
not
told you the
desperate,
truth.
just
Now you need to
waiting."
leave.
What they found wasn't just a woman trapped by the cold, but a promise she couldn't walk away from. As the storm closed in, every decision became a choice between saving a life or saving what that life still held on to. And sometimes, the hardest part of rescue isn't getting someone out, it's knowing what to carry with you when you do. If this story speaks to you, tell me where you're watching from, share your thoughts, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more stories like this can be told. The road Colter Wren followed that morning did not belong to any map worth trusting. It existed the way old habits did, half-remembered, lightly maintained, and used mostly by people who believed distance could solve things that time never quite managed to finish. Snow had taken most of it back already. What remained was a narrow ribbon of compressed white, winding between dark pines that leaned inward as if sharing a long, quiet secret. The truck moved slowly. Colter preferred it that way. At 56, he had learned that speed rarely fixed anything worth fixing. It only shortened the moment before something went wrong. He wore the same things he always did in winter: a faded green jacket that had seen more weather than years, black jeans stiff with cold at the knees, and combat boots that had outlived their original purpose by at least a decade. There was nothing decorative about him. Even the way he held the wheel steady, deliberate, suggested a man who believed control was not a gift, but a duty. Beside him, Briggs lay stretched across the passenger seat. The German Shepherd looked asleep, but Colter knew better. Dogs like Briggs did not sleep in unfamiliar terrain. They rested in layers, one ear always half-tuned to the world, one breath always slightly deeper than the last, ready to break into motion if something shifted. Briggs had a coat the color of ash and iron, darker along the spine, lighter where winter had worn through the fur at his chest. His eyes, when open, held that particular calm that came from understanding more than was necessary. They had been together long enough that silence between them no longer needed translation. The radio on the dash crackled once, then fell quiet again. Maddox Snowline Services didn't talk much unless there was something worth saying. Colter had checked in an hour earlier: position, direction, estimated return. That was enough. No one expected conversation. Out here, talk was something people saved for when it mattered. The cabin area lay just ahead. He didn't slow when the first structure came into view. It wasn't much to look at, just a squat wooden shape hunched beneath a burden of snow, its roofline sagging slightly in the middle, windows boarded from the outside, with gray planks that had long since lost their original color. There had been a time when families came here in the summer: fishing lines, folding chairs, laughter that didn't carry far beyond the trees. Colter had seen places like this before. Vacation turned memory, memory turned neglect. Winter had no patience for neglect. He passed the first cabin, then the second. Nothing moved. Not even the small disturbances that usually marked wildlife. No fox prints crossing the drift, no broken crust where deer might have stepped through. The snow lay too smooth, too complete. Colter's eyes lingered on the tree line. Something about the stillness pressed at him. Not urgent, not loud, just wrong, in a way that didn't explain itself. He kept driving. The third cabin stood farther back, almost swallowed by a shallow rise of land. The fourth had lost part of its porch. One corner collapsed inward like a tired shoulder. The fifth. Briggs moved. It wasn't sudden. There was no sharp bark, no lunge, just a shift, a lifting of the head, one ear turning, then the other. His body tightened, not in fear, but in focus. Colter didn't look at him right away. "Go ahead," he muttered, almost to himself. "Tell me what I'm missing." Briggs stood, slowly at first, like something waking from a deeper place than sleep. Then, faster. He stepped onto the seat, front paws braced against the door. nose tilted toward the window. He wasn't looking at the road anymore. He was looking past it. The truck rolled another 10 yards. Then Briggs let out a single bark. Short, sharp, not loud enough to carry far, but enough to break the shape of the morning. Coulter's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. That bark wasn't for warning. It wasn't for territory. It was a call. Briggs had only made that sound a handful of times since they'd been together. Not often, not casually, always when something needed attention, not later, not eventually, but now. Coulter eased off the gas. The engine dropped into a lower hum as the truck slowed. They were nearing the last cabin. It stood at the edge of the row, slightly apart from the others, as if even when it had been used, it had preferred a little more distance. The snow had piled higher around it, drifted into uneven banks along the walls. One side of the roof dipped lower than it should have. Nothing about it said, occupied. Everything about it said, left alone. Briggs barked again. This time, he didn't wait. He lunged toward the door, paws scrambling for purchase against the handle, claws clicking against the metal. Easy, Coulter said, though there was no real command in it. He pulled the truck to a stop. The engine idled for a moment, then he cut it. Silence returned. Not the natural quiet of winter, but the kind that followed interruption, as if the world had paused to listen for what came next. Briggs whined. Not loudly, not insistently, just enough to make it clear that whatever had caught his attention hadn't gone away. Coulter opened the door. Cold hit immediately, sharp and clean, slipping under the collar of his jacket, down the back of his neck. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped out. Briggs was already moving. He leapt from the truck, landing lightly despite his size, and headed straight for the cabin, not circling, not hesitating. Straight. Coulter watched him for a second. There were times to question instinct, and there were times to follow it. He shut the door and went after him. The distance wasn't far, 20, maybe 25 yards, but the snow made it feel longer. It gave slightly underfoot, the top crust breaking just enough to slow each step. His breath came out in visible bursts, hanging briefly in the air before dissolving into nothing. Briggs reached the door first. He didn't try to push it open. He didn't scratch. He stood there, rigid, head angled slightly toward the wood, and barked. Again and again. Not frantic, not aggressive, but persist, like knocking. Coulter approached more slowly. The door was old. That much was obvious. The wood had warped over time, edges no longer sitting cleanly in the frame. Snow had drifted up against the lower half, packing tight along the base. He reached out, gloved hand brushing lightly against the surface. Cold, solid, nothing unusual except. He paused. There was a faint give near the top corner. Not open, but not sealed the way it should have been either. Behind him, the trees shifted slightly as wind moved through them. It wasn't strong enough to carry sound far, but it was enough to move branches, enough to scatter fine snow into the air. Briggs stopped barking. That was what caught Coulter's attention more than anything else. The silence. The dog's head tilted, ears forward, listening. Coulter held still. For a moment, there was nothing. Just wind. Just the quiet weight of winter pressing in from all sides. Then, a sound. Not from the trees. Not from the road. From inside. It was small. So small he might have missed it if Briggs hadn't already been listening for it. A dull thud, followed by something softer. Not quite a voice. Not quite movement. But something that didn't belong in an empty place. Coulter leaned closer to the door. "Hello?" he called. His voice, steady, but not loud. No answer. Briggs stepped closer, nose nearly touching the wood. He let out a low, uncertain sound, not fear, not warning, just recognition of something that needed naming. Coulter knocked. Once. Firm. The sound echoed dully through the cabin. For a moment there was nothing. Then, a faint shift. Something scraping lightly against the floor inside. And then, finally, a voice. Thin, dry, controlled in a way that suggested effort. "You're late." Coulter blinked once. Not because he didn't understand the words, but because of how they were said. Not relief, not panic, just a statement. He rested his hand against the door again, this time more firmly. "My dog heard something," he said. "You alone in there?" A pause, long enough to feel deliberate. "That depends," the voice replied. "Are you planning to break my door?" Coulter glanced at Briggs. The dog's eyes remained fixed on the wood, unblinking. "No," Coulter said. "Not if I don't have to." Another pause. Softer this time. "Good," the voice said. "I'd hate for this place to fall apart faster than it already is." Coulter exhaled slowly. The cold pressed harder now, or maybe he was just noticing it more. Either way, something had shifted. The road behind him no longer felt like an option. Whatever this was, it wasn't something he could drive past. Briggs lowered himself to the snow, settling near the door. Not leaving, not pacing, just staying. Coulter looked at the warped frame, the packed snow, the slight misalignment at the top corner, then back at the trees, then down at the dog. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's see what you found." Coulter did not move for several seconds. The voice behind the door had been too steady for panic, too sharp for surrender, and too tired to belong to someone who was merely annoyed. Whoever she was, she had been inside long enough to decide that fear was a waste of breath. Briggs remained low in the snow, chest pressed near the threshold, ears forward. He did not bark now. He listened with the grave patience of a creature who understood that some doors were not opened by noise. Coulter leaned closer to the warped wood. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Coulter Wren. I'm with Maddox Snowline Services. We're checking access points before the weather drops harder." A pause came from inside. "Maddox Snowline," the woman repeated, each word dry as kindling. "That sounds official enough to be inconvenient. It's mostly volunteers." Worse. Volunteers come with moral confidence. Despite himself, Coulter almost smiled. Almost. "What's your name?" Another pause. This one felt heavier. "Evelyn Marlowe." The name sat between them, like something old pulled from a drawer. Coulter looked over the door again. The top corner was jammed inward. The lower half had snow packed against it from outside, but that alone would not have trapped her. Something else had shifted the frame. Above the door, the remains of a porch beam sagged at an angle, its broken end buried in the drift like a bone under white cloth. "Evelyn," he said, "are you hurt?" "Depends how dramatic you need me to be." "I don't need dramatic." "Then no, not badly." Briggs lifted his head slightly, as if judging the answer. Coulter noticed. "What does 'not badly' mean?" "It means my wrist and I are no longer on speaking terms. It means my pride has suffered more than my body, though both are filing complaints. And it means I'm cold." That last part was quieter. Coulter's focus tightened. "How long have you been inside?" "No clock. Guess. Long enough to regret not bringing better gloves. Not long enough to start apologizing to furniture." "Evelyn." The silence after her name was different. She heard the warning in it. Not authority, not impatience. Just the tone of a man measuring time by consequences. "Since late morning," she said at last. Coulter looked toward the pale sky above the trees. It was afternoon now, though the light had already begun to thin. In deep winter, daylight did not leave like a guest. It slipped out like a thief. He crouched near the bottom of the door and brushed packed snow away with one gloved hand. The wood groaned softly, but did not shift. "Can you get to a window?" "No." "Why?" "Because the previous owners boarded them from the outside. Sensible people, apparently. They didn't plan for old women with unfinished business." "They said." That phrase landed strangely. Unfinished business. Coulter did not chase it, not yet. "Is there another door?" "There was. Back room. A cabinet fell across it when I tried to force the front." "You trapped in the front room or the back?" "Middle. If that helps your geometry. It helps. It shouldn't. This place was designed by men who thought straight lines were a threat to character. Briggs gave a soft huff through his nose. Evelyn heard it. Is that your dog? Yes. What kind? German Shepherd. Another silence. This one did not belong to cold or fear. It had a memory in it. What's his name? Briggs. Briggs, she repeated, softer, as if testing the name against something she had lost. That's a serious name. He's a serious dog. I can hear that. Briggs rose, stepped closer to the door, and pressed his nose near a narrow split in the wood. His breath fogged against the crack. From inside came a faint sound, not movement, not quite laughter. I had a shepherd once, Evelyn said. Marlowe. He had one ear that never committed to standing up. Looked like he was always questioning the government. This time Coulter did smile, but it was small and gone quickly. Briggs questions me, he said. Same idea. A sensible animal. The wind moved over the cabin roof and scattered loose snow down the side wall. Something above them creaked. It was not loud, but it changed the air. Coulter stood. Evelyn, I'm going to check the frame. Don't push from inside. I stopped pushing an hour ago. The door won. I need you away from it. I am away from it. How far? Far enough to resent being asked. Evelyn. A sigh came through the wood. Thin, controlled, too controlled. 6 feet maybe. There's an overturned chair near me. A table, some old boxes, a smell that may once have been curtains. Coulter stepped back and studied the cabin more carefully. The porch beam had dropped diagonally across the outside frame, pinning the door out of true. If he forced it from outside, the beam might shift. If the beam shifted wrong, the remaining porch roof could come down into the entry. Not impossible, but not clean, and not with her near the other side. He walked along the front wall, boots sinking into drifted snow. Briggs followed for 2 steps, then stopped and returned to the door. Coulter noticed that too. The dog had made his decision. He was not guarding the cabin. He was guarding the woman. At the first boarded window, Coulter pulled at the edge of the plank. It held firm. Old nails, frozen wood, and years of neglect had made a single stubborn thing out of separate pieces. He checked the second window. Same problem. The boards had been fastened from the outside long ago, probably to keep vandals and storms out. Now they were keeping Evelyn in. There was something cruel about that, though no one had meant it cruelly. That was how neglect worked. It waited until intention no longer mattered. He returned to the door. Windows are boarded tight. I told you. You did. I enjoy being believed eventually. Don't get used to it. A dry little laugh came from inside, brief as a match struck in wind. Then it faded. Coulter heard her breathing afterward, not heavy, not frantic, but uneven enough to matter. Evelyn, do you have heat in there? A stove. Lit? It was. Was? I had a small fire. It's tired now. Like everyone else in this cabin. Wood nearby? Some. Not enough. And before you ask, no. I'm not crawling around one-handed to feed a stove that smokes like it's trying to confess. Coulter reached for the radio clipped inside his jacket, then paused. He wanted more information first. How did you get here? That's a longer story. I'm not asking for poetry. Did you drive? No. Who brought you? Silence. The wind filled it. Briggs shifted his weight, one paw scraping lightly against the threshold. Inside, Evelyn said. A neighbor dropped me near the lane. Name? That's not necessary. It is if someone thinks you're home. She had obligations. So do I. The answer came sharper than intended. Coulter heard it himself and let the cold settle over the words. Behind the door, Evelyn did not answer right away. When she did, her voice had lost some of its bite. Nora Whitcomb, she said. She lives down near the county road. Her husband has bad lungs. She brought me out this morning because I asked her to. I told her I only needed 20 minutes. And then 20 minutes turned into a conversation with the past. The past, I should mention, is rude and has no respect for weather. Coulter looked at the door. There it was again. Not an accident. Not fully. A choice that had turned against her. Did Nora know the cabin was unsafe? No. Did you? The silence this time was answer enough. Evelyn spoke before he could. I knew it was old. That isn't the same as unsafe. It is, sometimes. So is living alone. People do that every day. Coulter had no quick answer. The words found a place in him he had not offered. Briggs whined once, low in his throat. Then, with an awkward gentleness rare for a dog his size, he lay down again and pressed one shoulder against the bottom of the door. On the other side, something shifted. Is he still there? Evelyn asked. Yes. Good. It was the first honest thing she had said, without armor. Coulter heard it. So did the cold. For a moment, no one spoke. The cabin seemed to gather around that small confession, the woman inside, the man outside, the dog between them like a living hinge, holding two broken halves of a day together. Then Evelyn said, quieter. Marlowe used to do that. Sit by a door like he was keeping the whole world from misbehaving. He never managed it, of course. The world is poorly trained. Coulter looked down at Briggs. Most of it. The dog's eyes flicked up at him. Coulter unclipped the radio. This is Wren, he said. I've got a live occupant in the last cabin at the North Larch site. Elderly female, conscious, possible wrist injury, prolonged cold exposure, front entrance obstructed, windows boarded, need support and structural guidance before forced entry. Static answered first. Then a woman's voice came through, firm and clipped, with a kind of calm that did not pretend danger was smaller than it was. Copy, Wren. This is Deputy Bell. Confirm occupant name. Coulter kept his eyes on the door. Evelyn Marlowe. The radio hissed. A beat. Then Deputy Grace Bell said, repeat that. Evelyn Marlowe. From inside the cabin, Evelyn gave a weary groan. Oh, wonderful. Now I'm news. Coulter held the radio near his mouth. You know her? Grace Bell's answer came after a moment. Tighter now, but still controlled. I know of her. Hold position. Do not force the main door unless conditions change. I'm reaching Harlan Voss. If anyone knows those cabins, it's him. Copy. And Wren? Yeah. Keep her talking. Coulter looked at the wood, the warped frame. Briggs lying against the threshold as if he had been carved there. Working on it. He lowered the radio. Inside, Evelyn said, Deputy Bell sounds young. She sounds competent. The young often do before they become tired. You always this encouraging? No. Sometimes I sleep. Coulter crouched by the door again. Grace is calling someone who knows the structure. Harlan? You know him? Everyone knows Harlan Voss if they've owned anything made of wood within 30 miles. He once fixed a porch railing for my sister and complained about the nails for 9 straight minutes. Sounds useful. He is. Against his will. The cold had begun to deepen. Coulter could feel it in the exposed skin around his eyes, in the stiffness of his fingers, even through gloves. He pulled a small emergency blanket from his pack and unfolded it halfway, thinking, there was no gap wide enough to pass it through. Not yet. Evelyn, he said, how cold are you? That feels like a personal question. Answer it anyway. A breath. My feet are numb, fingers hurt, teeth stopped chattering a while ago, which I assume is either improvement or betrayal. Betrayal. I suspected. You need to keep moving a little, but don't sweat. Flex your toes if you can. Open and close your good hand. My good hand is busy being offended. Put it to work. She muttered something he couldn't make out. Then, after a moment, done. Keep doing it. Bossy. Alive people get to complain. The sentence left him before he could decide whether to soften it. Inside, Evelyn went quiet. Too quiet. Coulter leaned closer. Evelyn? I heard you, she said. But the sharpness was gone now. What replaced it was more dangerous. Weariness. Coulter looked at Briggs. The dog had lifted his head again, eyes fixed on the door. No barking. No whining. Just attention. Tell me why you came here, Coulter said. Didn't we agree you weren't asking for poetry? I changed my mind. A long silence followed. At last Evelyn said, There's a box. Coulter waited. Cedar, about the size of a Bible, though less judgmental. It belonged to my sister. I thought it was still here. You came for a box. I came because I was tired of not coming. The words were simple. That made them heavier. My sister Clara loved this place, Evelyn continued. Back when it was still worth loving. She used to say, these cabins were ugly in a forgiving way. Said lonely people needed ugly places. Beautiful ones made them feel accused. Coulter listened. The wind scraped along the boards. Briggs did not move. She wanted to do something with them, Evelyn said. Something foolish and kind. Clara specialized in foolish and kind. I specialized in practical and late. Her voice thinned on the last word. Coulter did not interrupt. She died before winter came that year, Evelyn said, and I told myself I would return when it mattered less. Did it? No. A small, bitter laugh. It mattered more. Very rude of grief, if you ask me. Coulter lowered his gaze. Snow had begun filling the prints around his boots. Slow work, patient work. Winter did not need to hurry. Neither did regret. I found the box, Evelyn said. Or, I think I did. Then the cabinet shifted. When I tried to leave, door wouldn't open. Wrist went bad. Phone died. And there I was. Why didn't you tell Nora to wait? Because I am an old woman, Mr. Wren, not a helpless one. That's not an answer. No, she said softly. It's the excuse I used before I had one. Coulter let that sit. Then the radio crackled again. Wren, Deputy Bell. He lifted it. Go. I reached Harlan. He says do not touch the main door. Repeat, do not use the main door. The porch beam may be loading the frame. He's pulling up site memory now. He thinks there may be a vent or crawl access on the east wall. Check if you can. Coulter looked toward the side of the cabin. Copy. Checking east wall. He clipped the radio back and stood. Evelyn, I'm going to walk the side wall. Briggs stays here. I didn't ask. I'm telling you. Very military. Very cold. He turned, but Briggs did not follow. The dog remained at the door, close enough for his fur to brush the wood. Inside, Evelyn said, almost too softly to hear, Hello, Briggs. The shepherd's ears moved. His tail gave one single quiet sweep through the snow. Coulter stopped. He looked back. For reasons he would not have been able to explain cleanly, that small movement struck him harder than the first voice through the door, because it meant Briggs had already accepted her as someone under his care, and Briggs did not give that away cheaply. Coulter walked toward the east wall. The snow was deeper there, drifted by the wind into a sloping bank beneath the boards. He scanned the lower siding, brushing away powder with his boot. At first he saw nothing but rot, old paint, and nail heads dark with rust. Then he noticed a square outline half buried beneath the drift. A vent cover, old metal, bent at one corner. He crouched, cleared more snow, and tugged. It didn't come loose. He pulled again. The metal gave a small, stubborn shriek. Behind him, Briggs barked once. Not alarm. Answer. Inside the cabin, Evelyn spoke, voice faint, but still edged with dry fire. If you're breaking something, Mr. Wren, try to make it something ugly. Coulter gripped the vent cover and pulled harder. This time it shifted. Cold air moved through the opening. A narrow path, not enough to free her, but enough to reach her. Enough to begin. He looked back toward the crooked front door, where Briggs stood waiting like a black and tan sentinel against the snow. Ugly, Coulter called back. I can manage. And for the first time since he had heard her voice, Evelyn laughed, like she meant to stay alive. The vent opening was smaller than Coulter had hoped. Not useless, but narrow enough that anything passed through would need to be chosen carefully, not optimistically. The metal frame, once part of a ventilation system no one remembered maintaining, had been bent inward by years of neglect and winter pressure. The edges were rough, the kind that could tear fabric or skin if handled wrong. Coulter ran his gloved fingers along the rim, measuring without tools. Behind him, the wind shifted again, stronger now, carrying fine needles of snow that stung the exposed skin around his eyes. The sky had taken on that dull, metallic tone that didn't announce a storm, it promised one. He reached into his pack and pulled out a compact emergency kit. Not much. A folded thermal blanket, a pair of chemical heat packs, a half-full bottle of water, already beginning to cool. He crouched lower. "Evelyn!" he called, angling his voice toward the opening. A pause. Then her reply, faint but steady. "If that's your way of knocking, it's an improvement. There's a vent on the east wall. I can get some things through. Not big, enough to help." "You found the ugly option." "I did." "Good. I was starting to worry you'd try something heroic." Coulter didn't answer that. Instead, he tore open one of the heat packs, shook it until the reaction began, then wrapped it in a strip of cloth from his kit. "Move toward the sound," he said. "Slow. Watch your footing. I don't have much choice in speed." He heard it then, the careful shift of movement inside. Not the confident steps of someone mobile, but the measured repositioning of a body, negotiating pain and clutter. Something scraped softly across wood. A chair leg, maybe, or the edge of that fallen cabinet she had mentioned. Briggs barked once at the front door. Short, directed, then silence. Coulter glanced back. The dog hadn't moved from his post. Snow had begun to collect along his back, clinging to the dark fur like pale ash, but he didn't shake it off. He remained fixed, head angled toward the door as if he could see through it. Guarding, not the structure, the person. Coulter turned back to the vent. "You close?" he asked. A breath came through the opening, warmer than the air outside, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and something older fabric maybe, or the stale sweetness of long unused rooms. "Close enough to hear you without pretending," Evelyn said. "Good." He pushed the wrapped heat pack through the opening. There was a moment where it caught on the bent metal edge. He adjusted the angle, slower, careful not to tear the cloth. Then, it slipped inside. A pause. Then, after a few seconds, "Oh," Evelyn said. Not loud, not dramatic, but something in that sound changed the air between them. "Put it inside your coat," Coulter said, "against your chest, not directly on skin. You've done this before." "Yes. I don't suppose you have tea in that bag." "No. A disappointment." "Water." "I'll take disappointment with hydration." He passed the bottle next, angling it carefully through the opening. This time, her hand met it faster. He caught a glimpse of it, thin, pale, trembling slightly, not from fear, but from cold fatigue. The wrist was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, a strip of fabric tied too tightly in one place, too loose in another. "Loosen that wrap when you can," he said. "Not too much, just enough to keep circulation. You sound like a man who expects to be obeyed. I expect you to stay warm. That's less offensive." Another shift inside. A soft exhale. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved again, louder this time, pushing against the cabin walls with a low, sustained pressure. Somewhere above, wood creaked in response. Coulter stood, stepping back from the vent, eyes moving along the cabin side. He was no longer looking for access. He was looking for failure points. The siding had separated slightly near the rear corner. The roof sagged unevenly, heavier toward the front where the porch beam had collapsed. Snow had drifted deeper along the base, pressing against the lower boards. Not immediate collapse, but not stable. He reached for the radio. "This is Wren," he said. "Vent access confirmed on east wall. Occupant responsive. Mild hypothermia indicators. Limited mobility in one wrist. Structure compromised, but holding. Need assessment on safest entry point." Static answered. Then Grace Bell's voice cut through again, clearer now, sharper. "Copy, Wren. Harlan's on the line." A new voice followed, older, rougher, with a rasp that sounded less like age and more like a lifetime spent arguing with materials that refused to behave. "Ren, this is Voss." Coulter leaned his shoulder against the cabin wall, grounding himself against the wind. "Go ahead." "You said east wall vent. That tracks. That cabin had a crawl space channel back when it was built, not for people, just airflow. You won't get her out that way." "I know." "Good. Means you're not stupid." Coulter didn't respond. Harlan continued. "Front door's your problem. That porch beam dropped. It's likely putting weight on the frame. You force that door, you risk shifting the load. If it goes, it won't go clean." "Options?" A pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. "There's a side panel," Harlan said. "South wall, near the rear corner. They replaced it about 20 years back after a rot issue. Cheaper wood, not load-bearing." Coulter turned, scanning the structure again, adjusting his position to see along the angle Harlan described. "Height? Mid-wall. About chest level. You'll see a difference in grain, if you brush the snow. And if I open it? You make it small, controlled. You don't tear it out like you're mad at it. That panel gives, the rest stays. And inside? Depends what she's got leaning against it." Coulter looked back toward the vent. "Cabinet," he said. "Then you move slow," Harlan replied. "You don't rush old wood, it remembers." The line went quiet for a second. Then Harlan added, softer, "And Ren, don't do this alone, if you can help it. That storm's turning." Coulter glanced at the sky again. "I'm already not alone." He ended the transmission. For a moment, he stood still. Then, he moved. Briggs lifted his head as Coulter approached the front again. "Stay," Coulter said quietly. The dog didn't move. Didn't need to. He had already chosen his position. Coulter crouched by the door. "She's still with you?" he asked. "A beat." Then Evelyn answered, "I assume you mean me." "Yeah. I am currently alive, and mildly offended by your phrasing." "Good." He hesitated. Then, more quietly, "I've got another option. Not the door. Side panel. It'll take time." "How much time?" "Enough to matter." A long breath came from inside. "I have some," she said. "Not an unlimited supply, but I'm not bankrupt yet." Coulter rested his hand against the wood again. "Keep moving your feet." "I am." "Keep talking." "That feels like a trap." "It's not." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, "Tell me something," Evelyn said. "Why didn't you keep driving?" Coulter blinked. The question didn't come from fear. It came from something more precise. He looked down at Briggs. The dog's gaze remained fixed on the door, steady as gravity. "My dog stopped me," Coulter said. "That's not an answer." "It is." "No," Evelyn said softly. "It's a story you tell yourself so you don't have to explain the rest." The wind pressed harder against the cabin. Coulter felt it through the boards, felt it in his chest. For a moment, he considered not answering. Then, "Because something felt wrong," he said. "That's better. I don't ignore that anymore." "You used to?" "Yes." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. Inside the cabin, something shifted. Not furniture, not movement. Understanding. Evelyn spoke again, quieter now. "I used to ignore things too." Coulter didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. That was the difference now. The conversation no longer needed to fill space. It held it. Briggs exhaled slowly, lowering his head to rest against the door. The wind howled once, louder than before, then settled into a steady push. Coulter stood. "I'm going to start on the side wall," he said. "Mr. Wren?" He paused. "Yes." "If you're going to break something," Evelyn said, voice faint but steady, "break it in a way that leaves enough standing for someone else to come back to." Coulter looked at the cabin, at the sagging roof, at the boarded windows, at the door that had held her in longer than it should have. Then he looked down at Briggs. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I was planning on that." He turned and walked toward the south wall. The snow there was deeper. The wind had done its work well. He brushed it aside with his boot, then his hands, clearing space until the wood beneath showed through, faded, uneven, but distinct. And there, a difference. subtle, but real. The grain ran slightly off from the rest of the wall. The nails were newer. The panel, he set his hand against it. Not pushing, not yet, just feeling. Behind him, the dog stayed. Inside, the woman waited. And between them, a wall that would not hold forever. Coulter did not start cutting right away. The south wall panel was there beneath his palm, exactly where Harlan had said it would be. But old buildings had a way of lying even when they told the truth. A board could look weak and still hold weight. A nail could look harmless and still split a frame. A man could think he was saving time and cost someone what little time she had left. He brushed more snow from the wood. The panel was slightly newer than the wall around it, though newer meant nothing generous. Its paint had flaked into pale islands. The grain ran crooked. The nails had rusted into dark freckles at the edges. Behind him, Briggs still held his post at the front door. The dog had stopped looking like an animal waiting for command. He looked like a vow. Coulter unclipped the small hatchet from his truck kit, then laid it on the snow instead of using it. Too much force, too much noise, too much chance of turning one problem into 5. He took out a folding pry bar and a compact handsaw. The radio hissed at his shoulder. "Ren," Grace Bell said. "Status. Located the south panel. Checking edges. Harlan says don't cut top first. Copy." A pause. Then Harlan's voice came through, rough and close, as if the man were standing behind him with snow in his beard and disapproval in his pockets. "Start low, work upward. If the panel binds, stop. If the wall talks back, listen." Coulter glanced at the cabin. Old wood always talk this much? Only when young fools are near it. "I'm 56. Then you've had time to become a seasoned fool." Coulter almost smiled. The wind took it before it formed. Inside the cabin, Evelyn's voice drifted faintly through the vent. "Is Harlan insulting you?" Coulter raised his voice enough for her to hear. Professionally. "Good. He charges extra for friendly." Harlan grunted over the radio. "She can still insult people. That's a good sign." "She can hear you," Coulter said. "I know." From inside came a dry, tired answer. "Unfortunately." For one brief moment, the broken cabin held something almost like company. Then the wind pressed hard against the wall and reminded them all what the day intended to become. Coulter knelt and began clearing the lower edge of the panel. Snow had packed into the seam, frozen hard in places. He chipped at it carefully with the pry bar, slow enough that each movement had a purpose. Inside, Evelyn was quiet again. Too quiet. "Evelyn," he called. "I'm here. Talk to me. I thought we had moved past your need for entertainment." "We haven't." A faint breath. "What would you like? Weather report? Moral philosophy? Cabin gossip?" The box. Silence. Coulter let the pry bar rest against the wood. Not pushing. Waiting. When Evelyn answered, her voice had lost its humor, though not its strength. "You persist. So is the cold." "That's unfair. The cold has been practicing longer." He said nothing. The panel creaked faintly as he tested the lower seam. Not bad, not good, promising enough to distrust. Inside, something shifted cloth perhaps, or Evelyn adjusting herself near the vent. "My sister Clara kept it under the bench by the west wall," she said at last. "A cedar box." She said cedar was good for keeping moths away from things that deserved better than being eaten. "What's in it?" "Letters, a few photographs, a cassette tape, if mice haven't become historians." "Cassette? You do remember those, don't you?" "I'm old enough. Not old enough to sound so wounded." Coulter worked the pry bar a quarter inch into the lower seam. The panel resisted. He stopped. Listened. The cabin answered with a soft groan deep in the frame. Not collapse. Warning. He eased pressure off. "What's on the tape?" he asked. Evelyn took longer this time. When Clara was sick, she hated writing. Said pens made her feel like she was filling out paperwork for death. So she talked into that little recorder of hers. Plans, recipes, complaints. Songs she half remembered. Things she wanted me to do after. Coulter looked toward the front door. Briggs had lifted his head again. He was listening too. What did she want you to do? A long silence. Then Evelyn said, "Come back here." The words did not fall. They stayed. Coulter lowered his gaze to the snow. The wind moved around him, and for a moment, he was not outside a cabin in Michigan. He was somewhere else entirely, listening to someone speak about promises made to the dying. Promises were strange things. Small when spoken, immense when carried. He had carried his own for years. Some days it felt like honor. Other days it felt like a stone in the lung. Evelyn spoke again. She wanted to make this place useful. Not beautiful, useful. Clara didn't trust beauty much. Said beauty made people behave like they were visiting a museum. Useful places let them take their boots off. Coulter kept his hand still. She wanted widows to have somewhere warm to come in winter, Evelyn said. Old men who'd outlived everyone who knew how they took coffee. Veterans who didn't like fluorescent lights. People who had houses but not homes. That sort of foolishness. That doesn't sound foolish. It did when she said it from a hospital bed while I was trying to understand property taxes. The bitterness in Evelyn's voice was not cruel. It was old, like iron left in rain. Coulter set the pry bar down and reached for the radio. "Grace, any update on arrival?" "Road's rough," she answered. "Harlan and I are moving as soon as he finishes loading braces. Wind dropped 2 trees near the county turnoff. Crew is cutting 1. I'm taking a snowmobile in, if the truck can't pass." "Copy. Vren." "Yeah. How's she holding?" Coulter looked toward the vent. "She's talking. That bad?" He heard the edge beneath Grace's calm. Concern sharpened into procedure. "She's coherent. Cold. Wrist injury. Still got her temper." Evelyn called faintly, "Tell Deputy Bell my temper is none of her business." Grace's voice softened over the radio. "Tell Mrs. Marlowe her temper may be the most medically reassuring thing about her." Coulter relayed nothing. Evelyn had heard enough. He returned to the panel and began working at the lower corner again, gentler this time. The seam opened by a fraction. Air moved through it, stale warmth meeting outside cold. A narrow victory. Inside, Evelyn said, "I should have brought Nora in with me." Coulter froze. "That wasn't about rescue." "Not really. You said she had to get back to her husband." "She did. That doesn't make me less dishonest." "You told her 20 minutes. I told her what would make her leave without arguing." Coulter held the pry bar still. "Why?" "Because, if she'd come inside, she would have made that little worried face." "What face?" "The one people wear when they think grief has made you fragile." "I hate that face. It makes me want to move furniture." Despite the cold, despite the danger, Coulter felt a reluctant warmth at the edge of his mouth. That how the cabinet fell? No. That was gravity being theatrical. He worked another inch loose. This time the cabin did not complain. Good. Or pretending to be. Evelyn's voice became quieter. "Nora has enough to carry. Her husband can't breathe properly when the air gets sharp. She checks on me because she thinks, I don't know, she worries. I let her think. She hides it well. It's one of the small kindnesses left to me." "You could have told her the truth." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because truth invites witnesses." Coulter stopped again. That one found him cleanly. Truth invites witnesses. He thought of men in hospital rooms, men whose names he still avoided saying aloud on certain mornings. He thought of the way people asked, after loss, if you were all right, not because they expected truth, but because ritual demanded a question and politeness demanded a lie. Inside the cabin, Evelyn continued. "I wanted to open the box alone, hear Clara alone, fail alone, if that's what happened. I didn't plan to become a cautionary tale with a federal-looking man and a judgmental shepherd outside the door. Not federal. Still judgmental." Briggs gave a low huff. Evelyn laughed softly. The sound was thin, but it lived. Coulter slid the pry bar farther under the corner and eased backward. The panel shifted enough to show darkness beyond it. He leaned close. A gap. Small. Too small. But the first real opening. He could smell the cabin interior now, not just smoke, but cedar dust, damp wool, old paper, and the faint metallic bite of cold wood. "Panels giving," he said. "Should I clap?" "Save energy." "I dislike how often you're right." "Me too." He switched to the handsaw, choosing a line along the weakened seam Harlan had described. The saw bit slowly. Each stroke made a soft, rasping sound, almost intimate against the storm. It was not the sound of battle. It was the sound of persuasion that mattered. He did not want to conquer this cabin. He wanted it to release one person without taking another thing from her. As he worked, Evelyn spoke again, but not to him at first. "Briggs?" The dog lifted his head immediately. Coulter paused, listening. "I don't suppose your friend is always this stern," Evelyn said from inside. Briggs's tail swept once against the snow. Coulter looked back. "Careful," he called. "He'll start liking you. I have that effect on difficult males. It fades once they realize I expect them to behave." Coulter returned to the saw. Then Evelyn said, "Marlowe died in March." The blade slowed. "I thought winter was over," she continued. "That was the foolish part. March lies." "He went out behind the house and lay under the birch trees. Wouldn't come when I called. Not because he didn't hear, because he knew something I didn't want to know." Coulter said nothing. The saw moved again, slower. "I sat with him until dark," Evelyn said. "Clara had already been gone 3 years by then. I remember thinking grief was rude to repeat itself in different fur." Briggs rose from the door and walked toward the south wall. Coulter stopped fully this time. "Briggs," he said quietly. The dog didn't look at him. He came to the panel, sniffed near the lower gap, then lowered himself beside it, pressing his body against the outside wall as close to Evelyn's voice as he could get. Not at the door now. Here, near the opening. As if he understood the shape of the rescue had changed. Inside, Evelyn went silent. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Is he there?" "Yes." A pause. "Good." The single word carried more than gratitude. It carried recognition. Coulter looked at the German shepherd, snow dusting his ears, eyes half closed against the wind but body firm against the cabin. For a moment, he saw what Evelyn might have heard. Not rescue, not command, not technique, but presence. A creature choosing proximity without asking to be thanked for it. Coulter resumed cutting. The panel loosened another inch. Then the radio cracked with Grace's voice. "Wren, Nora Whitcomb just called dispatch." Coulter's grip tightened on the saw. Inside, Evelyn said nothing. Grace continued. "She's asking if anyone has seen Mrs. Marlowe. She sounds scared." Evelyn's voice came from inside, small and sharp at once. "Do not let her come up here." Coulter lifted the radio. "She wants Nora kept off the access road." "Already done," Grace said. "I told her conditions are unsafe. She's staying at the county turnout until I reach her." Evelyn exhaled. But it wasn't relief. It was shame. Coulter lowered the radio. "She knows you're alive," he said. "I didn't want her frightened." Too late. That was unnecessarily honest. "You prefer useful lies?" "Usually." The saw hung in Coulter's hand. He looked through the widening gap, but still could not see her. Only darkness, dust, and a slant of old floorboard. "Evelyn," he said, "people get frightened when they care. That doesn't make it easier to be the cause." No. He thought of how many times he had been the reason someone stood in a hallway with bad news in their face. How many calls had begun with his name and ended with a silence no one could repair. "No," he repeated, "it doesn't." For the first time, she did not answer with a joke. Coulter saw it again. The final stroke at the lower seam released a thin splinter of wood. He set it aside, then worked the pry bar under the loosened corner. "Panel's opening," he said, "but there may be debris inside." There is always debris inside, Evelyn murmured. Sometimes people call it furniture. He eased the board outward. A strip of interior became visible. Dim, crowded. The edge of a fallen cabinet leaned across the inner wall, exactly where she had said. Beyond it, he saw the corner of a table, an overturned chair, and a flash of pale hair in the low light. Evelyn, not fully visible, but real now. Not a voice, not a problem, a person. She sat on the floor wrapped in her coat, one arm held against her chest, the other braced near the table leg. Her face was lined, narrow, and startlingly composed. Silver hair had escaped its pins and fallen against her cheek. Her eyes, when they found the gap, were sharp enough to make the cold seem less certain of itself. "Well," she said. Coulter looked through the opening. "Well, you look less official than you sound. You look less helpless than you should. That is the kindest insult I've received today." Briggs pushed his nose toward the gap. Evelyn's expression changed before she could stop it. "Not much. Just enough." The armor loosened. "Hello, Briggs," she whispered. The dog gave one soft breath through the opening. Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them again, practical as a woman returning from a chapel before anyone saw her kneel. "There," she said. "Now that we have all been introduced through a wall, what's next?" Coulter studied the cabinet blocking the inside. "Next," he said, "we make the opening wider without bringing the cabin down. And after that?" He met her eyes through the gap. "After that, we get you out." Evelyn looked past him toward the falling snow, then back into the room behind her, where some unseen piece of the past still waited in its cedar box. "No," she said quietly. Coulter's jaw tightened. "No?" Her eyes returned to his. "After that," she said, "we decide what has to come with me." The wind pressed against the cabin again. The panel creaked in Coulter's hand. And somewhere behind Evelyn, in the dimness of the old room, the past remained where she had found it small enough to fit in a box, heavy enough to keep a woman from leaving for years. Coulter did not answer right away. The opening in the south wall was still too narrow for Evelyn to pass through, and the cabinet inside leaned across the space like an old animal refusing to move. The wind had worsened. Snow came sideways now, not falling so much as being thrown. It tapped against his jacket, slid under his collar, settled in the seams of his gloves. Inside the cabin, Evelyn watched him through the gap. Her face looked smaller now that he could see it. Not weak, just worn by cold, pain, and too many years of carrying herself without allowing anyone else to touch the weight. "What has to come with you?" Coulter repeated. "Yes. We'll get you out first." That sounds practical. It is. And incomplete. Coulter looked past her into the dim room. He could see the fallen cabinet, the warped table, a tipped chair, the edge of an old bench against the far wall. Somewhere under or near that bench sat the cedar box. Letters, photographs, a tape, the remains of Clara's voice waiting inside a thing small enough to hold in two hands. But outside, the cabin was shifting, and time had teeth. "Evelyn," he said, "you don't need to prove anything to a box." Her eyes sharpened. It is never really the box men underestimate. That struck him quiet. Briggs stood beside Coulter, nose near the gap, breath steaming in little white bursts. He did not whine now. He only watched Evelyn with an almost priestly patience, as if the dog had accepted that humans sometimes had to circle pain several times before they could leave it. Coulter removed another strip of loosened paneling and set it carefully in the snow. The gap widened by a few inches. The cabin gave a low, tired sound above them. He stopped, listened. The roof held. For now, the radio crackled. "Ren," Gray said. "Status. Opening is widening. Interior, blocked by cabinet. Occupant, visible, conscious. How's the structure?" Coulter glanced up at the sagging roofline. Still standing, complaining. Harlan's voice cut in, rough and impatient. "Complaining is fine. Screaming is bad. I'll keep that in mind. Do that. And Ren, don't pull that cabinet through the opening unless you know where its weight is resting. It may be bracing something by accident. Coulter looked through the gap again. The cabinet leaned awkwardly, one upper corner jammed against the inner wall. It could be blocking the exit, or it could be helping hold part of the damaged wall steady. Old buildings had a cruel sense of humor. "I need eyes inside," Coulter said. "I have two," Evelyn replied. "One is currently judging you. Can you see whether the cabinet touches the ceiling?" She turned slowly. The movement cost her. Her face tightened, but she swallowed the sound before it became a groan. Briggs stepped closer. Coulter saw it. "Don't twist too much. I was planning to dance, but since you object..." She leaned just enough to look. "No," she said after a moment. "It's against the wall, not the ceiling. The top corner is wedged near a shelf." "Harlan?" "Then don't yank it," Harlan said. "Shift it low, inch by inch. If it binds, stop. If she can push from inside." "She's got one bad wrist," Coulter cut in. "I heard that," Evelyn said. "Good. I also have one good foot and a lifelong hatred of being discussed like damaged luggage." Harlan snorted over the radio. "She hasn't changed." Evelyn looked toward the sound of the radio. "Neither have you, Harlan Voss. Still making furniture nervous from a distance. Furniture respects me. Furniture fears abandonment." Coulter almost told both of them to save their breath. He didn't. The humor was thin, but it was heat of another kind. He widened the lower part of the opening first, keeping the top intact. The work was slow, frustrating, and mean on his hands. The saw slipped twice where ice had formed along the seam. His shoulders tightened against the effort. Old pain woke beneath his right collarbone, a deep ache left over from years he rarely spoke about. He ignored it. For a while, ignoring worked. It usually did. He cleared enough space to reach one arm inside, then both. The cabinet's lower edge was close enough to touch. He braced one boot against the snow, reached through the opening, and pushed sideways. The cabinet shifted a fraction. Wood scraped against wood. Inside, Evelyn flinched at the sound. "Sorry," Coulter said. "I've heard worse music." He pushed again. This time, the cabinet moved an inch and stopped. A sharper creak came from the wall. Coulter froze. Briggs barked once. Not loud. Warning. Coulter eased off immediately. The creak faded. His breath came out slowly. "Good dog," Evelyn whispered. Coulter looked at Briggs. The German shepherd stood rigid, ears forward, eyes not on Evelyn now but on the wall above the opening. He had felt the change before Coulter trusted it. The radio hissed. "Wren?" Grace asked. Stopped. Wall shifted. "Back off?" "Already did." Harlan came in. "Brace before you move more." "Got anything flat?" "Panel pieces, short pry bar, toe strap in the truck. Use the panel pieces as pads. Strap around the cabinet if you can reach. Don't drag straight out. Rotate." Coulter pictured it. Not easy. Possible. The dangerous kind of possible. He stood and turned toward the truck. Briggs stepped in front of him, not blocking the path exactly. Blocking his rhythm. Coulter looked down. "Move." Briggs did not. The dog's eyes held his. Outside, the wind roared across the clearing. Snow streaked past them in white lines. Inside the cabin, Evelyn was silent. Coulter tried to step around Briggs. The dog shifted again, placing his body between Coulter and the wall. "Briggs." This time, the name came harder. Briggs lowered his head, but did not move. For 1 second, anger flashed through Coulter, not true anger, not at the dog, but at delay, at time, at the old and familiar rage of being close to solving something and having the world demand patience. Then his shoulder spasmed. A sharp, bright pain ran from collarbone to spine. Coulter's breath hitched before he could hide it. Inside, Evelyn said, "What was that?" "Nothing." "That was the worst lie told in this cabin today, and I have contributed several." Coulter shut his eyes briefly. Briggs remained in front of him, not disobedient. "Certain." Evelyn's voice changed. No humor now. Mr. Wren. He opened his eyes. What? Are you hurt? No. Then say that again, without sounding like a man trying to outrun his own body. He looked toward the gap. Her face was partly shadowed, but her gaze was clear. I'm fine, he said. Fine is what people say when they have decided truth is inconvenient. The words landed too close to things already spoken. Truth invites witnesses. Coulter turned his face into the wind and let the cold bite him clean. He could force the cabinet. He could work through the pain. He had done worse with less. Somewhere in him lived an old machine that knew how to keep going after sense had left the room. But Briggs was still standing there, and Evelyn was watching through a broken wall. He hated that. Not them. The being seen. I've got an old shoulder injury, he said at last. How old? Old enough to know better. And yet, here you are. I can work. I didn't ask if you could. Men can do many foolish things with impressive posture. The radio was quiet. Even Harlan, by some miracle of discipline, said nothing. Evelyn leaned closer to the gap, slow and careful. You are not going to turn my rescue into your punishment, she said. Coulter stared at her. There it was, plain, unkind, in the way medicine sometimes had to be. I don't know what you think you owe the world, she continued. But I am not accepting payment in torn muscles and heroic stupidity. Briggs gave a small huff, as if endorsing the motion. Coulter looked down at him. You too? The dog blinked once. Evelyn said, he has better manners than you, but yes. For a moment, no one moved. Then Coulter laughed. Not much, not warmly. More like something cracked open under pressure. It was gone, almost immediately, but it had existed. He crouched beside Briggs and placed one gloved hand on the dog's neck. All right, he said quietly. We do it slower. Briggs stepped aside. Not triumphant. Just satisfied that reason had been restored. Coulter went to the truck and retrieved the tow strap, a second pair of gloves, and 2 wooden traction boards he kept in the bed for ice. When he returned, he moved differently. Not less determined. More honest. The pain remained. But it no longer got to pretend it wasn't there. He used the traction boards as temporary supports under the opening, sliding one through to create a smoother path. Evelyn, with her good hand and one boot, helped nudge the fallen debris away from the cabinet's base. Each time she moved, he made her stop before she grew breathless. Each time he pushed, Briggs watched the wall instead of the people. The work took longer than pride would have allowed. Good. Pride was a poor engineer. Inch by inch, the cabinet rotated. A gap formed inside the room. Not enough for Evelyn yet. Enough for air to move more freely. Enough for light to reach farther into the cabin. Coulter saw the west wall now. The bench. The dark space beneath it. And there, half hidden by a fallen cushion and a layer of dust, sat something small and rectangular. Cheddar. Even from outside, he knew. Evelyn saw where his eyes went. Her expression changed. Not relief. Fear. A strange kind of fear, the kind that comes when what you came for finally appears, and you are no longer allowed to pretend the search is the reason you haven't touched it. That it? Coulter asked. She nodded once. Her throat moved. Yes. The cabin seemed quieter after that. Even the wind felt held back for a heartbeat, waiting. Coulter assessed the gap again. If he widened the panel another few inches and shifted the cabinet a little more, Evelyn might be able to crawl or be guided through. But crawling with a bad wrist in a freezing cabin, with debris around her and the structure unstable, would be ugly. Still better than the front door. He reached through and adjusted the traction board. We'll get you through first, he said. Evelyn looked at the cedar box, then back at him. This time, she didn't argue. That worried him more than arguing would have. You hear me, he said. I hear you. Box after. A faint smile touched her face, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Wren, she said, I have spent years making after into a country I never visit. He had no answer. The radio crackled before he needed one. Ren, Grace said. We're 2 miles out by snowmobile. Harlan is with me. We had to leave the truck at the turnoff. ETA depends on drift. Copy, Harlan added. Don't get ambitious before I arrive. Evelyn raised her voice slightly. He's already been ambitious, his dog corrected him. A pause. Then Harlan said, Good dog. Briggs's ears twitched. Coulter shook his head once and returned to work. The next section of panel gave more easily, too easily. A vertical crack ran upward farther than he wanted. He stopped. The wall trembled. Above, the roof answered with a long, low groan. This one was different. Not conversation. Complaint. Coulter stepped back fast. Evelyn, away from the wall. I am farther. She moved, but the space inside was tight. The cabinet, though shifted, still limited her path. Her foot caught on something. She gasped. Briggs barked sharply. Coulter leaned toward the opening. Evelyn, I'm fine. Don't use my lines. I'm bruised and annoyed. Better? The groan faded. Snow slid from the roof in a heavy sheet, crashing down near the front corner. The sound rolled through the cabin like a drum struck under earth. For several seconds, no one spoke. Coulter's pulse beat hard in his neck. Then Evelyn said, quieter than before, That was new. Yes. Bad? Not good. He looked at the panel, the crack, the shifted cabinet, the cedar box under the bench. The rescue had changed again. The opening was close. Not finished. Close enough to tempt a man who didn't know how to stop. Coulter inhaled slowly. Then he set down the pry bar. We wait for Grace and Harlan. Inside, Evelyn stared at him. You're stopping? For now. Because of the wall? Because of the wall. Because of my shoulder. Because my dog is smarter than both of us. Briggs sat down in the snow, as if this had always been obvious. Evelyn looked at the dog, then at Coulter. For the first time since he had seen her face, her expression softened without retreating into sarcasm. That must have cost you something to say. It'll bill me later. She nodded. The cold continued to press around them. The storm still moved through the trees, the cabin still held by old habit and questionable mercy. But something had changed. Coulter was no longer trying to win against the structure. He was trying to leave enough of it standing for Evelyn to walk away. And inside, Evelyn no longer looked only toward the cedar box. She looked toward the opening, toward the dog, toward the man who had finally understood that rescue was not the same as force. Mr. Wren, she said. Yeah. When this is over, remind me to apologize to Nora. You can remind yourself. I suppose that's fair. A beat passed. Then she added, almost grudgingly, and if I forget, Briggs may glare at me. He's good at that. Briggs, hearing his name, laid his head on his paws. The crack in the wall remained. The cedar box waited. The snow kept falling. And somewhere beyond the white curtain of trees, help was coming slowly. Not like a miracle, not like cavalry, but like ordinary people refusing to leave one another alone in weather that had no use for mercy. The snowmobile arrived as a sound before it became a shape. At first, Coulter thought it was only the wind finding another way through the trees. Then Briggs lifted his head, ears sharp, body still. A moment later, the low mechanical growl pushed through the storm, uneven but determined, coming from the direction of the old access road. Company, Coulter said. Inside the cabin, Evelyn shifted carefully. If it's a marching band, tell them I'm not dressed for it. It's Grace and Harlan. Worse. People who will expect me to be reasonable. The snowmobile emerged between the pines with its headlights smeared by blowing snow. Deputy Grace Bell drove, hunched forward against the storm, her tan sheriff's coat zipped to the throat, dark braid tucked into her collar, eyes narrowed behind clear protective glasses. She was younger than her voice sounded, perhaps late 30s, but there was nothing uncertain about the way she handled the machine. Behind her rode Harlan Voss, broad and stiff, in an old brown canvas coat patched at both elbows. His gray beard was crusted with ice, and he carried a bundle of short braces tied across his back like a woodsman, bringing ribs for a house that had forgotten how to stand. Grace killed the engine near Coulter's truck. For 1 second, the world seemed louder without it. Wind, snow, old wood, Briggs breathing. Grace stepped off first. "Ren? Here." Her eyes moved over him quickly. Shoulder, hands, stance, then the broken wall. "You look like you made friends with bad lumber." It was a difficult courtship. Harlan climbed down slower, knees protesting with a visible lack of dignity. That cabin was trouble when it still had curtains. Evelyn's voice came thinly from inside. "Harlan Voss, if you insult this cabin while I'm still in it, I'll haunt your tools." Harlan stopped, looked toward the opening, and sighed. "Still alive, then. Unfortunately for your peace." "Good." The word was gruff, but it landed gently. No one wasted more time. Grace moved to the south wall, dropping to one knee beside the opening. Her manner changed when she looked inside. Less officer, more neighbor. "Mrs. Marlowe, I'm Grace Bell. We're going to get you out, slowly." "I remember your father," Evelyn said. Grace blinked once. "Most people do. He gave terrible directions." "He still does." "Then I trust you more than him." Grace smiled despite the cold. "I'll take it." Harlan was already examining the crack Coulter had stopped at. He touched the wall lightly, not like a man testing wood, but like a doctor checking a pulse. "You stopped at the right time," he said. Coulter did not answer. Harlan glanced at him. "That was praise. Try not to look injured by it." "I'll recover." Eventually, Harlan set 2 braces beneath the compromise seam, angled against the snow-packed ground. Grace helped wedge the lower ends into place, while Coulter held the loosened panel steady. Briggs stood slightly back, watching each person in turn, as if counting them into a pack he had not fully approved yet. Inside, Evelyn was asked to move toward the opening, but not through it. "Not yet." Grace spoke to her in a level voice, giving one instruction at a time. "Hand here, foot there, rest, breathe, stop if dizzy." Evelyn obeyed, with visible resentment. "That expression is unnecessary," Grace said. "This is my cooperative face. I'd hate to see the other one." "You may yet." Harlan used a small saw to finish the lower side of the panel, then set a traction board across the threshold Coulter had made. The opening widened. Not large, but enough. The cedar box remained visible beneath the west bench. Coulter saw Evelyn glance at it. So did Grace. "Mrs. Marlowe," Grace said gently, "we'll come back for anything important once you're clear." Evelyn's mouth tightened. Harlan grunted. "No, we won't." Grace turned. Harlan pointed toward the ceiling. "Once she's out, this place may shift more. Nobody goes back in, unless we like funerals." The silence that followed was not long, but it was cold. Evelyn looked at the cedar box. Coulter looked at Evelyn, and there it was, the true weight of the rescue. Not flesh against weather, memory against survival. Coulter crouched by the opening. "Where exactly is it?" Evelyn's eyes moved to him. "Under the bench. Left side. Behind the cushion. Can you reach it?" "No." "Can you push it with your foot?" Grace looked at him sharply. "Ren?" "Not asking her to crawl," Coulter said. "Just asking if she can move it closer." Evelyn looked down, calculating. Pain pulled at her face, but she did not perform bravery. She simply measured what was possible. "With my boot," she said. "Maybe." Briggs stepped closer to the opening. Grace held up a hand, slowly. Evelyn braced her good hand on the floor. She extended one foot toward the bench, nudging at the fallen cushion first. Dust lifted. Something scraped. The cedar box shifted half an inch, then stopped. She breathed hard. "Enough," Grace said. "No, Mrs. Marlowe." "No," Evelyn repeated. Not loud, but final. Coulter understood before anyone else did. If she left it there, part of her would remain trapped even after they pulled her into the snow. He reached through the opening, shoulder protesting immediately. The angle was wrong. The traction board cut into his ribs. He extended his arm farther, fingers grazing the cushion. not the box. Briggs suddenly moved, not toward the box, toward Coulter. The dog pressed his body against Coulter's side, grounding him, stopping him from overreaching. Coulter froze, then adjusted. Grace noticed. Her face changed slightly. Not surprise, but respect. "Use the hook," Harlan said. He handed Coulter a bent metal pry hook, short and ugly. Exactly the kind of tool no one loved until it saved them trouble. Coulter slid it along the floor, caught the edge of the cushion, dragged it aside, then hooked the cedar box by one corner. Slowly, scraping over dust and warped boards, the box came closer. Evelyn watched, as if her breath had been tied to it. When Coulter finally got one hand around the box, he pulled it through the opening and set it in the snow. It was smaller than he expected. Weathered cedar, darkened brass latch, one corner dented. A kingdom reduced to a casket for paper and voice. Evelyn looked at it, but did not reach. "Now," Grace said softly. "You." The extraction was not graceful. Real rescues rarely were. Harlan held the brace. Grace guided Evelyn's legs. Coulter supported her under the good arm. Briggs stood close, but did not interfere, eyes locked on Evelyn's face. She had to turn sideways to fit. Her bad wrist was held tight against her chest. Her knee caught once against the traction board, and she hissed through her teeth. "Stop," Grace said. "No," Evelyn snapped. "If I stop now, I'll start thinking." "Then don't think. Breathe. I dislike practical women." "I know." Coulter kept his voice low. "Almost there. All. That phrase has ruined many lives. Today it's useful." With one last careful pull, Evelyn came through the opening and into the storm. For a second, she simply sat in the snow, wrapped in her coat, silver hair loose around her face, eyes blinking against daylight and wind. She looked less like someone rescued than someone returned from a room time had locked behind her. Briggs stepped forward. He did not jump, did not lick, did not make a spectacle of comfort. He lowered his head until his muzzle touched her good hand. Evelyn's fingers trembled, then settled into the fur between his ears. "There you are," she whispered. Coulter looked away before the moment could accuse him of watching too closely. Grace wrapped a blanket around Evelyn's shoulders. Harlan tucked the cedar box under his coat without asking permission, as if it were now part of the rescue equipment. Then the cabin shifted. A deep crack ran somewhere inside the front wall. Everyone heard it. Harlan's face changed first. "Move." No argument followed. Coulter and Grace lifted Evelyn between them, not carrying her exactly, but taking enough of her weight that she could stumble forward. Harlan grabbed the tool bundle and backed away. Briggs circled behind, glancing once toward the cabin. They had made it perhaps 20 yards when the front porch gave in. It did not explode. It did not collapse like a theater trick. It folded. The sagging beam dropped first, then the roof edge dipped, then a section of the front wall bowed inward with a tired wooden sigh. Snow slid down in a heavy white rush, swallowing the crooked door where Briggs had first stood barking. Evelyn stopped. No one told her not to. She watched the cabin sink into itself. Not completely, not dramatically, but enough that no one would walk safely through that door again. Her hand tightened on Briggs's fur. Coulter stood beside her, breath white in the air, shoulder throbbing, boots half buried in snow. "I'm sorry," he said. Evelyn did not look at him. "For what?" "The cabin." She stared at the fallen porch. Then she said, "It held longer than I deserved." Grace opened her mouth, then closed it again. Some grief did not want correction. Harlan stepped forward and placed the cedar box in Evelyn's lap. It held long enough. Evelyn looked down at the box. Her face changed, not healed, not brightened, but rearranged around the fact that something had been saved. "Clara would have said that," she murmured. "No," Harlan said. "Clara would have said I told you that porch was junk in 1998. Evelyn let out one broken laugh. It shook her once, then turned dangerously close to tears. She pressed her good hand flat over the cedar lid. Grace guided her toward the snowmobile sled, We need to get you warm. I am warm. No, ma'am. You are emotional. People confuse the two. Evelyn glanced at Coulter. I may like her. She grows on people, Harlan said. Like lichen. Grace ignored him. They settled Evelyn onto the sled, with blankets around her. Harlan secured the cedar box beside her, wrapped in another cloth. Coulter stood back for one moment, scanning the cabin, the fallen porch, the broken opening in the south wall, the path of footprints and paw prints across the snow. A strange thing settled in him. Not victory. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter. They had not beaten winter. They had only taken one person and one small box out of its mouth. For today, that had to be enough. Briggs came to Coulter's side and leaned against his leg. Coulter rested his hand on the dog's head. Yeah, he said quietly. You were right. Briggs's tail moved once. Grace started the snowmobile. Harlan looked back toward the ruined cabin and shook his head. Old places don't like being left alone. Evelyn, bundled on the sled, opened her eyes. Neither do old people. No one laughed. No one needed to. The snow kept falling over the cabins, over the broken porch, over the crooked door that had almost become a tomb and instead became a threshold. And as they began the slow ride back through the trees, Briggs trotted beside Coulter for the first few steps before leaping into the truck bed, watchful as ever, his eyes fixed not on the road ahead, but on the woman who had finally come out from behind the wall. By the time they reached the county turnout, the storm had begun to lose its fury, though not its cold. Snow still came down in hard, slanted lines, but the wind no longer sounded angry enough to uproot the world. It had become tired. So had everyone else. Nora Whitcomb was waiting beside a county truck, with its hazard lights blinking red against the white afternoon. She was a narrow woman, in her early 60s, wrapped in a gray wool coat, too thin for standing still, her hands tucked under her arms as if she had been holding herself together by force. Her face was pale with worry, and her eyes went straight to Evelyn on the sled. For once, Evelyn said nothing clever. Nora stepped forward, then stopped, as if uncertain whether she had earned the right. I thought you came home, Nora said. Evelyn looked down at the cedar box in her lap. I thought I could go alone. Nora's face tightened. You always think that. The words were not accusation. They were grief wearing ordinary clothes. Grace helped Evelyn into the warm truck. Harlan fussed over the blankets while pretending he was only checking knots. Coulter stood back with Briggs beside him, watching the reunion without stepping into it. Evelyn reached for Nora's hand. I'm sorry, she said. Nora closed her fingers around Evelyn's good hand, careful of the injured wrist. You can be sorry later, she said. Right now, you can be alive. Briggs gave a soft huff, as if approving the order. Evelyn looked at him through the open truck door. Yes, I hear you too. Coulter lowered his eyes. There were apologies that fixed nothing and still mattered. Evelyn spent 2 days under watch at Grace's recommendation. Though she argued with the nurse, the weather report, the county dispatcher, and a thermometer she accused of having poor manners. Her wrist was sprained, not broken. Her fingers recovered their color. Her pride, according to Harlan, remained in critical but stable condition. On the third afternoon, Coulter drove to Evelyn's small house near the edge of town. Briggs sat in the passenger seat, alert but calm. Evelyn opened the door before he knocked. You're early, she said. You didn't give me a time. Then you're recklessly punctual. She let them in. Her home was warmer than Coulter expected, not because of the temperature, but because of the objects. Quilts folded over chairs. Books stacked where shelves had surrendered. A chipped blue mug beside the sink. Photographs in mismatched frames, some straight, some leaning as if tired of pretending. The cedar box sat on the kitchen table, unopened. Coulter noticed. Evelyn noticed him noticing. I have been negotiating with it, she said. Winning? No, but I have better snacks. Briggs walked to the table, sniffed once, then lay down near Evelyn's chair, not guarding now, keeping company. That was different. Evelyn sat slowly. Coulter remained standing until she pointed at the opposite chair. If you loom, I'll give you chores. He sat. For a while, neither of them touched the box. Then Evelyn opened the latch. Inside were letters tied with faded ribbon, a few photographs curled at the edges, and a cassette tape labeled in blue ink. For when you stop pretending, you are only practical. Evelyn stared at the handwriting. Her mouth trembled once. Coulter looked away, but not far. She picked up the tape and gave a small, offended laugh. Clara always did enjoy being correct from beyond inconvenience. They listened to the tape on an old cassette player Evelyn found in a hallway closet. Clara's voice emerged thin, grainy, and alive in the way old recordings are alive, half ghost, half breath, wholly unfair. She spoke of the cabins, not as a dream too grand to touch, as something simple. A stove that worked, dry socks, a radio, a place where lonely people did not have to explain why they came. Evelyn closed her eyes. Coulter kept his hands folded because he did not trust them to do anything useful. Then Clara's voice softened. Evie, don't make this a monument. I know you. You'll try to make grief respectable. Don't make it useful. Put a kettle somewhere. That's enough to begin. The tape clicked. Stopped. The room stayed still. Outside the window, snow slid from a branch and fell in a soft white curtain. Evelyn wiped one cheek with impatience, as if tears were poor housekeeping. Well, she said. Coulter waited. That woman was bossy. She sounded like she knew you. Unfortunately. Briggs lifted his head. Evelyn looked at him, then at Coulter. We are not rebuilding the whole place, she said. No. We are not starting a charity with pamphlets and smiling photographs. No. We are not naming anything after me. Definitely not. She narrowed her eyes. You agreed to that too quickly. Coulter almost smiled. Seemed safe. And so it began not like a grand project, but like a stubborn little fire. Grace checked county rules. Harlan inspected the cabins and condemned most of them with the joy of a man who had been waiting years to say, I told you so, to buildings. Nora brought soup one afternoon and stayed to sort blankets. Coulter fixed what could be fixed and wrote down what could not. They chose the cabin at the head of the row. It still had a solid roof, a workable stove, and a door that opened without making a legal argument. Harlan reinforced the steps. Grace installed an emergency radio. Nora stocked a shelf with gloves, wool socks, instant coffee, and soup packets. Evelyn placed a kettle on the stove and said Clara would hate the color but approve the purpose. Coulter chopped wood. Briggs supervised. Badly, according to Harlan. Dog keeps looking at me like I'm doing it wrong, Harlan muttered. You probably are, Evelyn said. Briggs thumped his tail once. By late winter, the little cabin was not beautiful. That was its blessing. It smelled of pine, old iron, coffee, wool, and sawdust. A handwritten sign by the door read, Warming stop. Take what you need. Call before the cold decides for you. Below it, Grace had added numbers for dispatch, Maddox Snowline Services, and the county road crew. No ceremony opened it. No article announced it. One evening, after the last shelf was set and the last stack of wood was covered, Evelyn stood in the doorway with the cedar box tucked under her arm. Coulter stood beside the steps, green jacket dusted with snow, black jeans tucked over his combat boots, one hand resting on Briggs's back. You comin' in? He asked. Evelyn looked at the doorway. This one was straight. This one opened. This one did not hold her hostage. Inside, the stove burned low and steady. The kettle gave a small, hopeful rattle. The room glowed with a warmth modest enough to be trusted. Evelyn touched the doorframe. For a moment, Coulter thought she might turn away. Instead, she stepped inside. Briggs followed first, shameless as a small king entering his hall. He circled the rug near the stove twice, then dropped down with a sigh that suggested the place had finally met his standards. Evelyn looked at him. Comfortable? Briggs closed his eyes. That's a yes, Coulter said. She placed the cedar box on the shelf above the small table, not hidden, not worshipped, just present. Then she turned to Coulter. "You know," she said. "Clara said lonely people needed a place to take their boots off." Coulter looked down at his own boots, wet with snow and scuffed from work. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "That was not metaphorical permission to track mud across my floor. My mistake. Common among men." He removed his boots at the door. So did Harlan when he arrived 10 minutes later, grumbling as though civilization had gone too far. Nora laughed for the first time in days. Grace brought a thermos of coffee strong enough to qualify as municipal equipment. They sat together as evening settled over the old cabin row. No one said the place was healed. Places did not heal that quickly. Neither did people. But the stove burned. The radio worked. The door opened. And sometimes that was the first mercy. Later, when the sky darkened into blue and the snow softened to a silent fall, Coulter stepped outside. Briggs came with him. Across the clearing, the ruined cabin stood at the far end of the row, its broken porch bowed beneath white drifts. It no longer looked like a trap, it looked like an old story that had finally been allowed to end. Coulter felt Evelyn come to stand behind him. "She held long enough," Evelyn said. Coulter nodded. She did. For a while, they stood there without needing to fill the quiet. Then Evelyn said, "You'll come by again?" Coulter looked at Briggs. The dog looked back with the grave certainty of a creature who had already decided for both of them. "Yeah," Coulter said. "We'll come by." Evelyn nodded, as if that answer would do. Inside, voices rose around the stove. Nora correcting Harlan. Grace laughing under her breath. The kettle beginning its small song. Coulter looked once more at the snow-covered road. A road no map bothered to remember. A road that had brought him past a forgotten door. A road that, somehow, had led him back toward people. Briggs leaned against his leg. Not guiding now. Not warning. Just there. And Coulter, who had spent years believing rescue meant pulling someone out of danger, finally understood a quieter truth. Sometimes rescue was a door left unlocked. A stove kept burning. A place where someone could step in from the cold and find that the world, for all its poor training, had not entirely given up on them. Some doors don't need to be broken open. They need to be approached with patience and someone willing to stay. In this story, no one defeated the storm. They simply chose not to leave each other behind. And sometimes that's where grace lives. Not in grand miracles, but in small, stubborn acts of presence. A hand that doesn't pull away. A place that stays warm. A promise that is finally kept, even if it's late. Maybe in your own life, there's someone waiting behind a quiet door. Or maybe you are. Either way, you don't have to face it alone. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts below. Tell us where you're watching from, and what part stayed with you. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're always welcome here. May you find a place that holds long enough, and people who choose to stay.